Thursday afternoon, and the best company to be in is definitely on the My Zone Facebook Live. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm Esther Kamati, and today we are bringing you the very first episode of Straight Talk for the year. So with debaters from Delta Secondary School as well as Concordia College, we're about to kick off the very first episode of the Straight Talk Debate League. Yes, you heard it right, the Debate League. So every Thursday we'll be having a debate right here in studio with different speakers from 10 schools from Windhoek. So we'll let you know all the details a bit later on, but without wasting any more time, there was of course the whole commotion around the use of EVMs and whether elections should be rerun, and that is exactly what we're debating here in studio today with learners from Delta Secondary School who will be proposing the motion that reads, "This House believes that the rerun of elections should be decided by public referendum," and Concordia College to oppose this motion. Let me not waste any more time. We'll give each speaker 5 minutes to convince you as to why their stance is the way. Calling the first speaker of Team Delta, that is the proposition team. Yeah.
I would like to greet the House at large. In a world whereby, first of all, you have public elections that are continuously rigged and people are certainly not happy with the outcome and they aren't happy with the way things are happening in the country. Secondly, when EVMs are seen to have an automatic button whereby certain votes were automatically inserted, where there's no paper trail, we believe that we are more than happy to believe that we should have a rerun for the elections. But thirdly and most importantly, we believe that people don't essentially have a say in what they choose as the public, and they don't essentially have a say in what they decide on for the people and for their country. Because of that, we don't necessarily believe it's something that we as Team Proposition stand for. Now, why do we believe that we need to rerun the elections, and why should this be run by a public referendum? First of all, allow me to quickly get into what exactly a referendum is and why it's necessary that we've come to the point whereby the only chance to get to a greater Namibia or a greater outcome will be decided or is based upon a referendum. But before that, what exactly is the nature of a referendum and how does it work? 3 things under this. First of all, it's a clear vote whereby you simply have a yes or a no vote, which allows citizens to approve or reject laws that directly affect them. Now, because I essentially have an effect on what's happening in this country, and I essentially am the man on the ground, we believe we are more than happy to grant you this opportunity to then choose or make a vote which essentially benefits you as a whole. But second of all, we believe it speaks for the people. Now, what happens when people's voices are heard? You feel more important in your country and you feel like you're making an impactful change because you're in a country whereby your voice is heard, whereby you're able to bring about change through things such as voting for your government, things such as voting for your party. We believe that's essentially important. But thirdly, what makes our referendum essentially legitimate? We need to look at how this is going to work. Basically, we want to have the UN oversee this referendum. But why do we feel this is a good idea? We believe it's a good idea because the UN has no political incentive or no political gain within African countries. They don't essentially have an influence on African matters. So by virtue of the UN coming in, they then oversee this and they ensure that whatever happens within the country is transparent and it's run legitimately, because that's the biggest problem that we have in today's debate. Now, why won't other bodies work? Why won't you have the Supreme Court doing this or Electoral Commission having this? First of all, we need to understand that they are already affiliated to the ruling party. By virtue of the Supreme Judge being chosen by our president, we then see there's an affiliation and there's a clear link and there are clear ties between the president and the ruling party and the Supreme Court or the Electoral Commission. These are bodies that are state-owned and state-run. Because of this, we don't necessarily bring about that impactful change that we as Side Proposition are fighting for. Now, what are the burdens in today's debate? 2 things. First of all, we need to prove to you that there's an urgency and there's an outcry for voter participation. There's an urgency and there's an outcry for people to actually see this essential change that they are talking about. But second of all, we need to prove to you how it's legitimate, and we've done this by showing you how we have the UN then overseeing to make this work. But what isn't our burden? First of all, we need to understand that anything that happens after the referendum is not our burden. What we as Team Proposition are fighting for is for people to come, have a voice, and have a chance to actually choose whether or not they want to side with this. Whether we have SWAPO, whether we have the same political party winning after that referendum, that is fine. By virtue of us allowing this to happen already shows that engagement that Team Proposition is fighting for. Now, to get into my argument before before time knocks out. Our first argument is participation and why it's the essential part and the essential key of democracy. We need to understand that democracy has certain pillars, but our main focus on our biggest pillar that we are focusing on today is participation. First of all, why do we feel this is true? Because voting is a clear representation of participation. Under this, I'll give you three analyses why it's important. First of all, the public actively choosing who they feel is legitimately bringing change. When you give me the position or the power to make a choice which directly influences me, we believe that you feel important within that country, and you feel that your duty is then being upheld. But second of all, we believe that the moment you allow people to then vote and choose whether or not they believe a rerun of elections is something essential, you then allow them, or you put them in a position whereby they partake in political decisions. Political decisions are important because when you're in the country and you then have an influence on what's happening in the country, you then feel like you're actually bringing about their change. Why is this important? We allow for conversations to take place. When these conversations don't take place, you have a dichotomy between the state and the public, because now people aren't happy with what's essentially happening on the ground. People aren't happy with everything that's happening in the country. So we believe this conversation is essential. Not taken, madam, you had your chance. Conversation is essential because now you can bring about their change. And because of the fact that we believe, because of the fact that we best air the views of the people, but my second speaker will continue elaborating that, we believe that we strongly win this debate. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in 2017, Kenya had reruns panel, and they had the exact same reactions as they did, and they had the exact same results as they did before when they had their first elections, right? But I'm going to show you why that is relevant within today's debate. For now, I'm going to be doing my rebuttals. So what do we hear from Topera's speech? Firstly, she talks about how, in her first minute, ladies and gentlemen, talks about how the elections are rigged panel and there were no paper trials, and I'm going to show you why that is irrelevant within today's debate, right? So firstly, panel, according to statistics, right? Not only statistics, according to what I have seen, panel, and what the rest of the world has seen, the Supreme Court had a case, panel, where they're deciding whether or not to have reruns, right? The reason that they chose not to have reruns was because there wasn't enough evidence to have a rerun, panel. We think that's the basis of having a referendum, to show that there is enough evidence to have the referendum. We don't think they had enough evidence, panel. Not only we, but we don't, the Supreme Court panel and other members from other countries, such as your South Africa panel, people from your SADC and your UN that you are vouching for, panel, said that there was nothing wrong with the elections, panel. And we think that is very important within today's debate, right? So what was the second point? Her second point was how she wants to have the UN oversee this referendum panel, and how they're a transparent body, and how the others are affiliated to your super parties and thus can be biased, right? So firstly, we think the UN was already participating in the overseeing of your elections that we had, panel. Her saying that the elections were rigged is her saying that the very same body that they're vouching for, panel, is not as transparent as they think, panel. We think that's very contradictory, panel, within today's debate, right? But furthermore, what did she talk about, right? So her major argument was participation, right? She talks about how people should participate in what goes on in their country, panel, and how they are affected by all these particular things, right? We think participation is lowered, panel, or not achieved within this instance because, one, I'm going to show you in my argument of no solvency, panel, I'm going to show you how participation does not take place, panel, or is lowered, panel, and thus not achieving your democracy that you vouch for, right? So into my counter-characterization. What is our team stance? Our team stance is that we firmly stand with the current status quo, panel, which is to not have a referendum, right? Why is this so? We think a referendum is going to make everything much more worse, panel, or it's not going to solve anything. It's not going to get the participation that they are trying to achieve, panel. But further than that, panel, what do we tell you, right? We think elections are not always going to be perfect, right? But they are the perfect platform for individuals to express their thoughts, panel. We think that's the basis of an election, right? No election is going to be perfect, right? There are always going to be complications, but the mere fact that the votes were free and they were fair, panel, we think that's the important part of elections, right? No, Tope, I'll take you later, right? But secondly, panel, in the case of the reruns before the Supreme Court, right, the applications failed to show how the elections were rigged, panel. To show how the elections were rigged, right? I think that's very important, right? But furthermore, panel, even without the paper trials, there were people there from the other parties, panel, overseeing when they were counting these votes, right? We think there were no elections rigged, panel. If your people from your ENC panel, people from your Itula's groups panel were there when they were counting the votes, panel, we think that's the second layer of protection that is needed, panel. We don't think a referendum is going to change anything because, one, in your very same elections and in the court with the Supreme Court panel, in that case, panel, people from your UN were there, your AU were there, people people from your SADC in your South Africa were there panel. We think that is enough layer to show that nothing was wrong with the elections panel, and having a referendum is quite useless, right? So into my first argument, which is no solvency. Why is this true? So panel, we get a number of problems from Tapia's speech about how the elections were rigged. There were no paper trials, and thus voters' rights were not upheld, right? Right? They just point to us all these problems, right? But we think they don't actually solve all these problems. Why is that so? They don't solve them just because the elections were rigged. What stops the people from rigging these referendums panel? What stops them from rigging the future elections that we're going to have if people do vote to have another elections, right? We don't think they solve that problem, right? Because when they tell us about their layer of protection, that very same layer of protection was there when we had our first election. We think you're going to get the same results. In fact, you're going to be wasting resources. For matter of fact, resources that our country doesn't even have panel. We think that's very harmful, right? What are the harms that they bring to the table, right? Economically, as I already stated before, they're going to waste resources that the government of the Namibian people doesn't have. But politically, panel, the government is going to lose credibility, right? Why is this important? Why should we care about this, right? People who voted panel are going to feel as though their vote was not counted for panel. They're going to feel as though their vote was not put in consideration, right? This is going to disencourage them to vote again, panel. This is going to disencourage them not only to vote for the elections that are to come, but for the referendum, right? We think this is very harmful, right? And they're going to lose trust in their government, panel. And even if people did really want to have a say in what was going on, panel, if you weren't happy with their current government or the people within power, you would have been seeing riots on the streets, panel. You would have been seeing riots, but you don't see that. Unlike South Korea, panel, people are happy with what's going on right now, panel. You don't see people on strikes. You don't see people going around the streets, panel. All you see are a few posts on Facebook that say that the elections were rigged, and because of that, you want to have a referendum, wasting resources, going around the country, panel. Topi, I'll take your POI. Oh.
First things first, panel. I think that within today's debate, it's important to understand where the conversation is happening and where the debate is at, right? So the debate isn't necessarily about whether or not the elections is rigged, right? It's about whether or not the people should have a say in when the election should be rerun, right? So that's where the conversation is at. So it's not necessarily about whether Itula's case is right or whether the Supreme Court agrees or not or whether elections within themselves are legitimate, right? Should the people be allowed to choose when they want to change the votes that took place or when they actually want to have a rerun in the elections, right? So that screws the entire case, which means I recommend that you change your entire strategy, right? So first things first, what I said was the conversation is supposed to be at who is then the best actor, and why are we then choosing the public, and why are we choosing the people to be the best actor to choose when elections should be rerun. So firstly, we're choosing the people because they are the man on the ground, and the elections have a direct effect on them, right? So the elections they are directly affected by the elections, so they are the ones that should decide when they deem the elections have been illegitimate, right? So they should have a say in when there should be a rerun, right? And why do we actually think that this is the correct choice, right? So what we need to understand is, panel, we want meaningful representation within government. So we want people to actually want that government in place, because at the end of the day, that same government is going to be the government that's going to be making choices on their behalf, right? So if the people within themselves deem that government illegitimate, they should have the right to then stand up and say, no, we deem this government illegitimate. We then want to step in and actually say that we want a rerun election. We don't necessarily think that the Supreme Court is in the best position to do this, because we don't necessarily know what's happening on the ground and what's the best choice for the voters within themselves, because that's why we have stuff like elections. And when we deem stuff like elections as illegitimate or they're not functioning, we believe that the people themselves that are partaking in the elections should then have a say in how it takes place, right? So what has Sophia told you within today's debate? She told you about why we want the UN to step in to begin with, because we want the UN to be that transparent body, because we understand the affiliation that exists within Parliament and why that's particularly harmful within this instance, and how it takes away from the meaningful representation and participation within democracy, right? And she also spoke to your participation and why that's particularly important within this instance. Why should people participate in this instance, and why is that important? We respect the participation of the people, and when it's stripped of them and they're not allowed to take part in it, it takes away from democracy as a whole. please engage that. That was a very important point for my first speaker, right? So onto my argumentation, right? There's a moral responsibility that exists from the people on the ground to actually engage in this, right? So you have the responsibility to ensure that the government that they're voting to power is actually doing what's right and what's for them, panel. So the minute that you disrupt this and you take away that moral responsibility, we believe that that's in turn harmful, because then you take away the people's ability to actually have a say in the government that is actually running their country, that is actually going to be making policies. And the entire thing that there was a keynote that came here and she spoke to us about there's no solvency and you waste resources and the government loses credibility, etc., etc. We say that's actually the issue at hand, right? So if you're going to have a rerun of an election and don't necessarily believe that the people's views were actually represented, we're going to have a rerun, we believe that it's the most credible thing to do to actually then have the people step in and actually have the elections again with a transparent body actually watching it and ensuring that people's rights are upheld. Right? We believe that in that instance, we achieve better solvency and we achieve better transparency, right? So on the entire issue that she spoke about how if the elections I'll take you in a second, if the same government that you're deeming as illegitimate is then having the reruns, etc., then what actually makes the referendum legitimate, right? So first things first, Tope already disregarded that entire point when she spoke to you about how we're having the UN step in to make sure that that affiliation doesn't take place, right? So that destroyed your entire case, right? But before I go into destroying your case further, I'll take you.
In what way was the democracy compromised for us to have a referendum in the first place?
Initially, no. What I've been telling you is, if the people have perceived that the democracy has been compromised, right, we believe that they should be in the best position to decide that a rerun is actually going to take place. It's not about whether or not the democracy is legitimate. It's about whether or not the people deem the election within itself legitimate. So they should be in the best position to choose that. You're debating outside of the context. We're not talking about legitimate elections, etc., etc. We're talking about the people having a say in when to have the elections again. So what have we told you within today's debate, right? We've told you about the importance of meaningful representation and why that's important within a democracy, right? Because we want the people to actually actively take part and choose their leaders and make sure that democracy is upheld along with participation, right? And secondly, what have we told you? We've told you about why the people have a moral responsibility to ensure that the government that they vote into place is actually a true representation of their needs and of their wants. With that, I thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, panel. I'm second speaker from side opposition. Starting off with my rebuttals. So side proposition comes up here. They claim that no, there's a problem because we didn't have a paper trail to begin with. We tell you that the High Court in 2014 said that it was legal or it was considered lawful enough for you to use EVMs without a paper trail. So we feel like you not using a paper trail is not necessarily a problem to why we should have a referendum to begin with. And then they also talked about how no, they want meaningful participation. We tell that you disincentivize the people already by going to them and telling them, you know what, we don't trust in the elections that were held, so we want to hold another election because of what had happened. So at the end of the day, you're not telling people, no, you're not necessarily advocating for these people to go vote again, because you are telling them something happened within the other elections, and at the end of the day, we still don't believe in the credibility of the results that we got. So at the end of the day, you don't necessarily get the participation that you are looking for. They talked about they want meaningful representation. Mr. Speaker, by virtue of Itula going to court, freely expressing what he feels was wrong with the government, putting government into question, putting the presidential election results into question, goes to show you how the government is providing meaningful representation in the terms that he's not suppressed, his ideas are still upheld, they are taken into consideration, but they didn't necessarily, get an ability to rerun the elections because they didn't provide any tangible solutions or not solutions but evidence to why they shouldn't consider the elections of last year. Before I move into my argumentation, please.
So please tell us, what exactly is the harm with the people having a say in whether or not elections are going to be rerun?
Excuse me?
What is the harm that comes with people having a say in whether or not elections are rerun?
There is no harm. We are telling you that we are not against people saying that they want a rerun, but we are telling that in order for us to have a referendum to consider an election, we need to have tangible tangible evidence to why the first elections were not credible. We need to understand and know the real reasons to why the first elections cannot be taken into consideration. Moving on into my argumentation. I'll be providing you with two arguments today, which are organic change and no urgency. Organic change, why is it true? We need to understand that us jumping into a hasty generalization of what a rerun might be goes to show to you how we would be affecting three stakeholders in today's debate, which are our economy, the impoverished people, which are mainly uneducated in our country, and thirdly, the legitimacy of the country and the government itself in that sense. We tell you that we thus support we support the current status quo because we still advocate for the organic change in which we'll have long-term policies which yield long-term effects and solutions, right, Mr. Speaker? Why is it important? Economically, we thought that a cash-strapped country like Namibia cannot be spending millions, if not billions of dollars on a referendum, and even to consider an election for that matter at the end of the day, because we have other important solutions to be dealing with, other problems to be dealing with, as opposed to having a re-election when we already had it and we already came out of a fresh one already. Politically, we tell that as a government, we advocate for organic change because we believe in the long-term policies that will be formed, thus yielding long-term effective and tangible results. Why should we care? We believe that it's government's mandate, because it has a moral obligation to set a moral standard in which it acts as an active role to protect the decision of people who actually voted and are happy with the decision, Mr. Speaker, and not necessarily just to bow down to the will of the minority and posting things on Facebook because they're not happy with the results. Mr. Speaker, it's an election. Someone will always be unhappy. Someone will always feel like the elections were not free and fair at the end of the day. But we tell you that we are on the basis of the Supreme Court doing what's just, Mr. Speaker, and standing by its final decision and pronouncing it free and fair. Why? No. My second argument. No urgency. Why is it important? We need to understand that Panduleni Itula and his co-applicants failed to assemble more tangible evidence to why we should actually even be considering a re-election. On that point, we shouldn't even be considering a referendum, because in the instances where we do start with a referendum, it's not something that just happens willy-nilly. You wake up today and tomorrow you want a referendum. It's something that happens, it has to happen to all the four corners of the country, and it has to be made sure that everyone has a meaningful decision, because they have to be incentivized on the pros and cons of having a re-election or even considering a referendum for that matter. Why is it important? We believe that politically, it's very unlawful or biased or for you to be putting the presidential election results in question when you don't even dare to put the National Assembly's results in question, because at the end of the day, we thought that we use the same metrics to appoint people in the National Assembly. So if the presidential one was used with the same process, why then are you deciding to question it? Because we use the same process at the end of the day. So why should we care? We believe that it's government's mandate to ensure that the complete representation and accountability of bodies that handle this national sensitive information are kept to account. And having that said, we need to know that it's up to government to use our resources effectively. I thank you.
Start. Chair, Separation of power is a fundamental principle of democracy that the Namibian government has failed horribly to enforce. This principle states that the legislation, the executive, and the judiciary should be three separate bodies. We think in principle and on paper that is what's true, but in practice that doesn't work. We think that things like the High Court, the Anti-Corruption Commission are all controlled by the SWAPO regime, and these things are not bodies that are initially separate within our country, and that is the biggest problem we have within today's debate. That is why we do not deem any credibility from any of these two bodies, not the Anti-Corruption Commission, neither do we deem any credibility from the High Court. These are bodies that say, no, we don't have problems with corruption in Namibia. The corruption we have is very minuscule. That is not problems that we're willing to focus on. That is the biggest problem we have within today's debate. We have problems with all that stuff. But there, what does this debate essentially boil down to, and what is this debate about? Two things. Firstly, whether or not we had an illegitimate election. But secondly, what's the best solution going forward with essentially what we're talking to you about? But before I get into that, let me get into strengthening a little bit of what Topeo said and why essentially we still buy into a case inherently. One, Topeo talks to you about how the elections were rigged and we had no initial paper trail to back any of these things up. The only response they gave was no. In 2014, the High Court deemed that the EVMs are okay to be used and there's no problem with that. Chair, at a point at which the SWAPO regime takes the EVMs, which should not belong to them, which belong to the state, and use them for their own personal elections in Ocho, we think that there's a big problem with that. We think that SWAPO cannot use the EVMs as they please, cannot take things like they want as their commodities. We think that these things don't belong to them. Because you're the ruling party in the country doesn't mean you essentially control everything that happens. It doesn't mean you can make sure and you can rig our democracy. We think that's not how things work. That's not what we want to have in our country. But secondly, Topeo talks to you about how we have better participation. No initial engagement on how we have better participation, but essentially, what is their response to that? They just say, no, one, we don't have better participation because no, people will be angry because of these votes and stuff. People will think that their votes aren't valid. We think that individuals themselves are the ones voting for these things. Individuals themselves are the ones crossing yes or no. So you won't think that your vote is illegitimate if these particular things happen in this particular context. I think that the case is based on a very circumstantial argument, and we'll go into that inherently. So what is the first thing they talk to us about? They talk to us about how, one, there's not enough evidence to prove all of these things. We already spoke to you about how all of these bodies are state-owned and state-controlled. That initially means that if any evidence exists, the judge in the High Court will make sure those particular things disappear, won't take those things into consideration, because he knows who's paying him. We think that you don't bite the hand that feeds you. That's the principle within Namibian countries and within African democracy. That is why judges in the High Court, for example, are not willing to roll the ball on people like Hage Geingob, people like Saki Shangala, because they know how these things function particularly, they know how it works, they know that they're the ones being paid by those particular individuals. What do they talk about secondly? They talk about how the UN oversaw the elections and how, they talk about firstly how the UN oversaw the elections. We think that we don't value that argument in this debate. I think that's not a true argument. I think they're lying in that instance. I think that the UN and no other external body did oversee the particular Namibian elections that happened this year. We think that the arguments we don't buy into. But thirdly, they talk to us about how elections won't always be perfect. We think that that is a very funny argument to run with in this particular debate, because I think the nature of democracy and the point of democracy is for you to do things according to the people, by the people. Your response cannot be elections won't always be perfect. We think that if they're not perfect, the point is to make them perfect the next elections. That is why we want to have this particular referendum, so that people can actively choose what they want to opt into. We think that's the biggest problem we have in this debate. But fourthly, you talk about how people in other countries, people of other parties oversaw these elections and counted the votes or whatever. I think that's not particularly true. I think that let me give these girls a lesson on how initially it works when you have an elections and who counts these votes. I think that votes aren't counted by other political parties. That's not how it works. Votes are counted by the electoral commission. So people from other parties weren't the ones counting these votes. But even the electoral commission in and of itself is run by the state and is run and is paid by people from SWAPO or whatever. But also they talk to us about how you feel like, I'll take you after this. As last point, they talk about how a referendum is expensive and the country has other important things to focus on. One, that is firstly not true, but secondly, we think that on a comparative, we'd rather have having an expensive referendum and then having to uphold our democracy as opposed to not having that at all. But I'll take you quickly, ma'am.
Okay, if the validity of EVMs without paper trails while still not interfering with the votes is non-credible, how can we legitimize a referendum?
Can you please repeat your prayer, ma'am?
If the validity of EVMs without paper trails while still not interfering with the votes is non-credible, how can we legitimize a referendum?
We gave you enough analysis on how, during the elections, these things weren't overseen by an external body. We think that when you have the UN actively coming up and overseeing this stuff, we think that you have now more transparency and more credibility inherently than you just having the people in Namibia overseeing these elections by themselves. So, what does this debate initially boil down to? Ladies and gentlemen, we think that it is morally repulsive to ignore what is happening in our country. We think that things are really, really bad. We think that democracy is not being upheld. We want better participation, ladies and gentlemen. We want the African democracy to flourish. If you side with the side that, if you side with the side that wins this debate for you, and you side with the side that wants to help the Namibian government, you must side with us, Chair. And thank you.
To be clear, yes, this debate is about should the public decide if there should be a rerun about the elections, right? But on our side of the house, we were arguing with the current status quo, right? We were saying that we don't want a rerun to begin with, and secondly, we do not feel that the public is legitimate to decide if there should be a rerun, right? So I'm going to be talking about two things in today's debate. First, necessity and legitimacy, and then lastly, who undermines democracy most. The first argument that we get on our side of the house on the first clash is that the people do not have a say in what happens in their country, and they want to give them a say. Basically, they talked about participation. Our first response to this is that when you tell the public, look, there was nothing wrong with the vote results, right? But there was something wrong with the process, right? Even though it did not affect the results, your votes did not count to begin with, right? And you need to rerun. They will feel like their votes did not count in the first place, so they will not. So you don't get participation that you want in the first place, because now they're going to feel like, look, their votes were void and all those particular things, right? Because it creates a mindset in these people that to begin with, the democracy in the country is undermined because their votes in the first place did not count. No, not right now. But secondly, they talked about how they should have the UN facilitate the public referendum. Look, the same UN already tells us that in the previous elections, right, they announced that even though it was unconstitutional, the elections were free and fair. And not only that, right, but we had more than one international body to facilitate the elections that happened. We had the AU and SADC as well, and other international bodies, right. And thirdly, they talk about how the Supreme Court is partial, right. Look, we're going to give you the Fisher example, right. They were not partial when it came to this particular case, right, because let's look at the mechanisms that they used. Firstly, they had judges from South Africa come in order to facilitate that particular thing, right. We see in the past that in other court cases, Madam Speaker, they were not partial, right. So we don't believe that just because like we've been having elections for all these years and all those particular things, right. In other cases, right, we feel as though because they're credible in all those particular things, right, and because of the mechanisms that they use, right, they were not partial in this sense. Instead, they were impartial, right. But not only that, but they failed to make it clear, right, to give us the difference between a referendum and the elections that took place, right? Because when they talk about how this referendum is going to have things like the UN to facilitate it and all those particular things, right? What mechanisms do you have in place that the same way that you believe that the previous elections were rigged, they will not be rigged in this particular sense? Because you say that those very same bodies that the very same bodies that facilitated the first elections are going to facilitate the same public referendums, right? But secondly, right, the second clash in today's debate, who undermines democracy most, right? Before that, yes.
Ma'am, we are saying that the public is not legitimate. Your problem is the public is not legitimate to choose whether or not we should have a rerun. Now, can you tell us who then? Because the public is someone that's directly affected by the state and what happens in the country. So if it's not the public, who then?
Look, we say that we don't want there to be a rerun to begin with. We support the Supreme Court's decision. We say that there should not be a rerun at all. Because we felt that the public had already voted that. And when you tell the public that, look, your votes don't count, you have to vote again, you're not going to get them to vote in the first place. You're not going to get them to get that particular participation because they feel that as though the democracy was undermined to begin with because you think that, look, no, your votes were in vain and they didn't count in all those particular things. Right? Because yes, we do need to focus about the public in this particular debate, right? Because look, like as we saw on news and all those things, right? We saw how a lot of Namibians like went to vote and all those particular things. A lot of them complained that. So you're just going to tell them that, look, your votes were made in vain and your votes were void. We don't believe that that is a mechanism that helps you get that sort of participation that you want to begin with, right? On the second clash of who undermines democracy most, currently it's the people who are in power and are your opposition leaders that want a rerun, not Namibians. We don't see Namibians rallying up for all these particular things, right? So the second that just because opposition leaders want this particular thing and then you support it, right? It feels as though instead of you taking the interest of the public, you're taking the interest of the opposition leaders instead. And like I've already told you, in every election there's going to be a winner or a loser, right? This just shows this does not put the interest of the public first, right? Instead it puts the interest of other opposition parties, and this only undermines democracy, right? On our side of the house, we say that yes, it was unconstitutional, but the votes still counted, right? And we also felt that the fact that the votes were not rigged and they still counted, this shows that we should not make these votes void. We shouldn't tell them that look, they didn't count and all those particular things. We feel that on their side of the house, they undermine democracy more in the sense that they tell the people that look, you need to re-vote and all those particular things, right? And not only that, right? Because having a referendum to begin with will make the government lose credibility and all those particular things. Thank you.
All right, so will a rerun of the elections, or should rather a rerun of the elections be decided by public referendum? There you had it. We heard arguments from both sides of the House, that is Delta Secondary School in team proposition, and representing team opposition was Concordia College. So we'll give the adjudicators some time to digest and just think about those arguments, as well as tell us who they feel won today's debate. But in the meantime, let's watch the following video, and we'll be right back with your results.
Thing spot on.
Social networking through the internet.
Networking through the internet. Yeah, that's a bit more specific. Any other tries?
Julle kan môre julle se foto op Facebook. Dan sal julle sien hoe hierdie joernaliste, the team that I showed you here, hoe hulle sukkel. It takes a lot. So the code of ethics for the Namibian media covers a number of subjects such as accurate reporting, correction, right of reply, the definition of public interest, the protection of privacy, and more.
Combine with what you can, but make sure you understand your customer and that you keep your customer number one. Because they are the reader, they are your sales, they are where your sources come from, where your stories come from. So keep your customer number one.
So we brought Standard Bank to Namibia in 1915. But before 1915, in 1909, a man was sent to Namibia to come and see if it was feasible for us to have a Standard Bank here.
Capturing the moment that matter, a picture speaks a million words. I'm referring to photojournalism here.
Coming out, so I need you guys to open something for Al Nathan, and then I need you guys to open something for Donnie Ubad.
A new nursing room at your school. You can write about that. Donating blood. What can you pack in your lunchbox? Things like that.
What should I do with this article?
Can you see the format of that article?
Okay. What are you enjoying about the camp so far? Kom ons maak 'n sirkel man. Wat 'n sirkel is iemand?
My name is Boyd Zanta, and I have no idea who I am, but I'm still figuring that out.
Okay, welcome to my presentation about design, and today specifically about editorial design. I'm the production director and training officer and also art director for NMH.
Someone came to join us at the media camp, and that is our CEO, Mr. Albi Bota.
So when I was sitting there just now, once again, I had a lot of appreciation for this energy that you're showing. And news is energy. If news does not have energy, it doesn't get shared. People don't know about it. So if whenever you do something, whatever it is, whether it is in journalism or in accounting or in whatever industry that you're going to be in your future, don't lose the energy. Don't lose the passion. Because if you do, you will find that life is very, very long. And you don't want to have a long life. You want to have a life full of energy.
One, go!
Somebody must have a signal. That you saw in the highlights video will be uploaded on our Facebook. So keep yourself updated and, of course, energy. Yeah!
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm one of the judges that was judging the previous debate that just happened. And just to quickly go through what we got, on side proposition, we had ideas surrounding democracies, whether or not we need to uphold things like participation and representation, and just to the ideas around credibility and how we best weigh that. And then the moral responsibility that we have to the people that are most affected by elections because they're the ones that voted. On side opposition, it was more of a thing of saying that the elections were fair and that we need to have organic change, which is basically that things need to just work out as it is because people voted and the courts deemed it fit that the elections were free and fair. So overall, we gave the debate to side proposition. And just basically, we felt like there wasn't a real clear stance on side opposition to suggest why the elections, in terms of a referendum and how it particularly operates on how we get it from side proposition. Because on one side, we hear that the elections were free and fair, and the one side then also somehow acknowledges by saying that it was unconstitutional, but still the courts said that it's deemed a fair election. A referendum basically just means that we decide whether or not we're going to have a rerun, and I think that that was not really contested on side opposition, although we get the ideas that there are like SADC observers that come in to observe elections and all those, and they deem the elections fair. The moral responsibility then becomes the boiling point. How do we best achieve that moral responsibility we have to the people by letting them have the say on things that best impact them again? And that's why we felt the debate went to side proposition. Thank you so much.
All right, so that was the feedback from the adjudicators, and they're going to get right back to work because we are not done. Giving you the very second debate, debating the very same motion, we have Hage Geingob Secondary School as team proposition, and then we have a swing team compiled of Delta Secondary School as well as Concordia College in team opposition. So stay tuned, don't miss a thing. Calling to the podium the first speaker of team proposition.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Siri Kashangeta as your first speaker of proposition. We are here to propose the motion that says that this House believes that the rerun of elections should be decided by the public's referendum. What we mean by this is that we should let the public decide on whether or not the election should be rerun or not, whether it should go in or not. And by the public, we mean the people who are entitled to vote. So, we have problems that exist in the status quo. We have elections are unfair due to corruption, and we also have the justice systems are too corrupted and biased. So what is the solution? The solution is that we let people to decide on the rerun of elections on the referendum. I, Sir Kashangeta, will be talking about the justice system are corrupt and how the referendums are important. My second speaker is going to strengthen my argument and tell us more on about how the public is in better position deciding rather than courts. Ladies and gentlemen, we have corrupt and biased justice system who serve in the interest of the poor, the powerful, and the rich. Well, they do not serve in the interest of the public. Why is it true? We all know about the elections which were held in 2019 by ECN, whereby our independent candidate filed a complaint on the results which were held by the High Court. Why is it important? The public's voice isn't heard anymore, and we don't decide on our leaders. Why should we care? We should care because as a general public, we are the ones affected by this. Ladies and gentlemen, we should give the public the opportunity for their voices to be heard and choose their leaders of their choice. Why is it true? We all know that a member from Bergzel exited and gave their people to rather decide on if they should exit or not. And they made the right decision by deciding that. Why is it important? It is better to decide on your leader than courts that are deciding to favor the rich and powerful. Why should we care? We should care because we as the general public are the ones who are affected. So what have I shown you in today's debate? I have told you that the courts serve in the best interest of the rich, poor, and corrupt. And also, we should let the public's voice be heard, and we are the ones affected by these decisions. I thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colin, the first speaker from Team Opposition. So, basically, what is a referendum? A referendum is a general vote on a single political question in order to make a direct decision. Now, moving on to my rebuttals. The first speaker from Team Proposition came here saying that the justice system are corrupted and are biased. First of all, we had judges that came from South Africa and other countries, South Africa basically, that came and judged and gave the ruling of the High Court. Second of all, she said that the court gives sides on the interest of the rich and famous. First of all, we have no such thing within this country. We don't have there are other we don't have, us as a country, the judges follow the constitution whereby they don't, yeah, moving on to third argument or something. She said there was a referendum in Brazil. We further then look into other countries such as Kenya, which had a referendum and still had the same result. And wasting money and such things is not what the government of Namibia needs in such a time. Moving to my first argument, we are undermining the majority rule. Why do I say so? First of all, well, because we as a democratic country, we need to put in consideration the fact that majority of the voters voted for SWAPO. And rerunning or setting a referendum will undermine the majority. Why is this important? This is important because the democratic country, we as a democratic country, we need to accept the fact that the majority rule and not try to put in other reasons whereby we want to rerun and waste money. This will later affect the country not just politically but economically as well. Why politically? First of all, people will lose their faith and their trust within the government or political system. Economically, we will lose future investment. Well, because for a company to invest in a country, the country needs to show that it is politically stable, and we carrying out this referendum won't prove that. Moving to my second argument, this will cause a financial setback. The government can't afford to waste its money on referendum or election rerun. We as a country can't afford to rush into a referendum or into a country rerun. Well, we know that Namibia is in a financial institution, a financial problem whereby schools nowadays can't even have electricity. There are days whereby school is totally locked down from electricity, like Concordia, which happened yesterday. This further affects the country, not just economically, but politically as well. Economically, the country will lose. The country will have to use about thousands or millions of dollars to invest or to put in this referendum or rerun, which is totally wasting money and actually getting the same results, which won't help the economy at all. Politically, as I said before, the country will lose its trust within. The political system will lose its trust from the people. I raised my case.
Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Monica Marquez from Hage Geingob High School, and I'm here to back up my team's case. So, ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, even if you have a Toyota car, a white Toyota car, and you change it to sparkling silver, it will not change the way it runs. Moving on to my opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, we are tired of being oppressed as a country. We are tired of not being recognized. We have officials who are representing us with their corruption, thinking that it benefits us. While we have the justice system, it is corrupt. Namibia's justice system is corrupt, and officials at power are corrupt too. But as a citizen, we live in a democratic country, so we deserve to be given the power to participate and represent ourselves in society. Let me move on to my case defense before I go to my rebuttals. My first speaker came strengthening our case that the court rulings are favoring the best interests of the already corrupt and not the government itself. So, what we are telling you within today's debate is that we as citizens, we public referendum deserve to be involved in this, whatever it is, that the courts should not decide what is in our best interest, but we as citizens should decide that. She also said that the 2019 elections did not provide a variable equatoral. We think as though there was no fair elections between the two. Okay, I move on to my rebuttals. First speaker of opposition came up here telling us that we are wasting money by rerunning the elections. It is better to spend and invest money on rerunning the elections than than us having a corrupt government, corrupt officials who are representing themselves to give themselves a high ranking of money while we citizens do have nothing. He also spoke that politicals will lose trust. Yes, of course, they will lose trust because they are practicing corruption in a country where we feel as though we are a democratic country. We don't feel that, but we are a democratic country. That is what we want to practice. He also spoke about judges follow a constitution. We feel as though even if judges have a constitution, they do not follow it. They go another way, turning away from the constitution which they are. Okay. Let me move on to my first argument, which is public is in better position by deciding their future rather than courts. The public referendum should decide what is in their best interest rather than the court deciding for the general public. Why is this true, ladies and gentlemen? The courts are corrupt, and what they decide is not in the best interest. We even have proof. Our own former justice minister, who was involved in a corruption scheme, who will want to be ruled by a minister who is involved in a corruption scheme. If we as Namibians, we stand out there to be democratic, to represent everybody equally and not corruptly. This proves that we cannot trust our own justice system anymore, and what we want is we want people who are there to rule a country and not practice corruption schemes. So why is this important, ladies and gentlemen? It is important because the justice system cannot decide whether the elections were not fair or not. We want our citizens themselves to do this. So why should we care? As a general public, we are the ones suffering, and ordinary citizens are not living a desirable life. These particular citizens, that is why we have people who do not want to participate in elections anymore, because they think that even if they do this, there is no change. The corruption will still exist. I move on to my majoritarian view. So what a majoritarian view? This is the ideas given by a larger number of people. Then I tell in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, that the larger number of people wins. Why is it important? We allow ordinary people to decide what they want, and this way we feel represented and there is participation, rather than the politicians or lawmakers who are corrupt deciding for us. Why is it true? It is true because we believe that the majoritarian view is the one that decides the moment we have high votes for a certain politician, and then we have the corrupt government or the corrupt court or high court judges or lawmakers who are going to change it because they feel as though this politician is not fit to be there. So what have I told you within today's debate, ladies and gentlemen? I have told you within today's debate that we need representation as Namibian citizens. We do not want corruptions to be practiced. Thank you. I raise my case.
Panel, why does a referendum holistically undermine democracy in itself, right? Firstly, because it misleads voters on a single choice. You have to look at the nature of a referendum, right? It's one choice. It's either a yes or no, right? This destroys the whole idea of a conversation. It destroys the whole idea of a democracy, right? You don't bring conversation to the people when you're telling them to choose either yes or no, right? But secondly, it hurts the majority rule, right? We tell you that the current situation of a country is dictated by the elections, right? The same people that went and got up and went to go vote for their leaders are the same people that are going to participate in the referendum. That's why my first speaker's example of why Kenya's referendum didn't change anything in their society still stands, right? Because what happens, firstly, will happen again, because those are still the same people that are politically engaged in that country or in that society. But thirdly, it furthers the social dichotomy, right? Because then you tell people you either have a yes or no choice. You don't bring any conversation, right? So because people already have different opinions and beliefs in society, when you tell them it's either yes or no, that dichotomy grows even bigger, right? So what will I be talking to you in today's debate? Firstly, I'll be rebutting to a few things that they said, and then secondly, I'll be giving you my arguments. So what have we heard from this side? They told us about how people should choose their own leaders. That's why it's a democracy in the first place. This is why elections happen, right? When you put a referendum in place, what you do is you really hurt the majority, right? Because the country's elections have already dictated how the country should be run, right? People do choose their own leaders. That's why we have elections in a democracy, right? It undermines the choice of the majority when you put a referendum in place, right? They told us about how the people are affected when you do put a referendum. We told you the same thing with the elections, and you do yourself an even worse job when you bring a second party or a second way of doing it, like a referendum, when you already have elections in place, right? You undermine what the majority have already chosen. You undermine the democracy of that country, right? They also told us that officials are corrupt, right? So we told you that, let's just say that their whole response to our case is that it's what might happen, right? We told you that just because a referendum takes place, it doesn't necessarily mean that all your problems are gone, right? All these problems can still occur with different bodies, can still occur with your independent candidate, right? Corruption happens in both worlds, but in our world, we do away with most of those problems because we don't further the social dichotomy, we don't hurt the majority rule, right? So what is my main argument in today's debate? My main argument in today's debate is how it misleads voters, and you completely do away with all the benefits that you want on your side, right? So what are some of the benefits that you've mentioned on your side? You told us how that you want people to have a choice, which I already told you, how my whole case already told you, how we already have those options for those, we already have options for those, for your average people that already vote, right? We told you that you do away with the benefits of people actually being heard, because there's not true conversation and we don't value it, because where true conversation is when people have elections and they have votes and they have many candidates, right? A referendum is just a yes or a no, right? How do you further the social dichotomy? Because people have to conform to either a yes or a no. So everything that you said on democracy on your side completely falls away. You completely do away with that on your side, right? How do you hurt majority rule, right? I already spoke to you about this in my characterization, right? Elections dictate the current situation of society, of a country, in whatever is going on in the specific country, right? So when you bring a referendum in place, you heard that majority rule because people have made a choice, people have spoken, people have already decided what they wanted, right? So when you do this, you heard the majority rule and you tell them that their voices are unheard. Now you force them to conform to either a yes or a no, right? So the problem with referendums holistically is that it distorts realities and people resort to their emotions. People are angry, right? So people are going to vote based on this one single option that you give them, right? They're not going to vote because they actually believe in something. They won't vote because they believe something is true, but they're going to vote because you told them this is your option. You either do this or you do that. You're doing away with participation holistically, which is one of the biggest pillars of democracy, right? You do away with one of the biggest pillars because it inspires lower participation, and it depends on even true balance in this sense, right? Because people are even discouraged to go and vote. People are discouraged to go and vote for the referendum because they feel like their choice won't be valid at the end of the day. So what have we said in today's debate? We told you about how you further the social dichotomy. We told you about how this hurts majority rule, and we told you about how this misleads voters based off one choice. Thank you.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if Supreme Court can declare the elections of EVMs unconstitutional without a paper trail, that means we have been having an unconstitutional president since the elections of 2014. Now, Supreme Court again deciding that this application of a rerun is unconstitutional due to some lack of evidence or so already shows that the Namibian justice system is biased and corrupt. They do not work on terms of democracy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what do we get from opposition? So firstly, what opposition tells us in today's debate is that the Namibian justice system is not corrupt. I mean, it is always in newspapers. It is visible. Our own former justice minister, who's supposed to uphold justice within our own country, was involved in corruption scandals, ladies and gentlemen. That already explains how corrupt the Namibian justice system is. So what we get, again get from opposition is a case of majority's vote and feathers social dichotomy. So what we tell you in today's debate is that majority does not count. Firstly, where does that majority comes if they cannot provide an audit trail for these elections, ladies and gentlemen? That is what we want in today's debate. And if it's social dichotomy, we tell you that it does not harm people actually, because you give people an easier and quicker option to decide. And the moment you do this, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to increase voter turnout. People will be willing and interested to take part in this social referendum because they are given a simpler choice of choosing between a yes and a no. So we tell you that you give people an opportunity for their voices to be heard again, ladies and gentlemen. Now, moving on the issue of a referendum, apparently with referendum corruption will still exist. What we tell you in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen, for as my voice has been heard, for as long as my voice has been heard and I have chosen the right leader and that same leader is corrupt, is better than having some corrupt leader that has been leading for so many years unconstitutionally, ladies and gentlemen. It's better to suffer the consequences of our own choice. So I'm just going to run through our comparative analysis. So what we get from the main issue from the opposition is the undermining the majority's rule of SWAPO because they got the majority votes. So what we tell you in today's debate is that majority is not the case. Let us first understand two things. Firstly, where does this majority come from? Because there is no paper audit trail that provides these votes that were cast. Secondly, majority will still turn up. The moment I hear that my same political party is going to take part in these elections, I have to turn up at the same time. I mean, the same thing that has happened before. So majority, undermining the majority rule in this case does not apply, but you rather increase public participation in these elections. Now we move to the issue of losing investment. What we tell you in today's debate is that you do not lose any investment because firstly you are investing in the future of our country. We tell you that it is better investing money in social referendum than having someone corrupt that is going to destroy our country and benefit people that are close to him. So in terms of justice system, we tell you that it is a good thing actually because our leaders are the most important people within our country and you have to give those people the right to choose who to lead them and for what purposes. Now we move on the issue of country will lose money into referendum. That's the same case. Money does not apply in this case. If they have the same money to be involved in fish rot and hire expensive lawyers to do all these scandals, then the same government has money to apply this social referendum. Now we come to the issue of social dichotomy. They then tell us about how we harm people from taking part in these elections, of telling us that people are given choices of a yes or a no. We then tell you that the moment you make a yes or no choice, it becomes easier for more people to take part in these elections. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be simple, it's going to be quick, it's going to be easy, and whatever is going to come out will be clear, ladies and gentlemen. So you do not harm people's choices in taking part in democracy, and we tell you that you increase voters turnout into these processes, ladies and gentlemen. Now we come to the issue of misleading voters, ladies and gentlemen. What we tell in today's debate is that there's no misleading because you are giving people an opportunity to decide. So what we want in today's debate is transparency, ladies and gentlemen. You giving people to decide for a rerun is you giving them an opportunity for their voices to be heard because they are not happy with the outcomes of the current election results because of what is going on within society, of corruption stories happening out. So what we want to achieve is transparency in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. So why public referendum? Firstly, we tell you that we want public to involve, we want public to decide because courts are biased. Courts do not serve in the interest of the general public, but they are agents of corrupt officials, ladies and gentlemen. They decide what the corrupt officials decide. We want the people to decide what they want. Give the people an opportunity. We are tired of court rulings. We are tired of court sessions. Give the people an opportunity to decide what they want because they are the ones to suffer the cost at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Why is this necessary and important? We tell you that it's important because it's the future of our country. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the third and final speaker from Team Proposition. So first of all, starting all over again, the first speaker from Team Proposition said that the justice system is corrupt and biased. And then she also brought up the fact that the fish rot, she also brought up the case of the fish rot. First of all, why the fish rot people scandal is all over because, well, these people were caught, they're in jail. This was the doing of our constitution, our judges, our police people. So you saying that our people, our policemen, our constitution are corrupt, then why are these people still in jail? Why are these people still going to court? Why are these people not fined for bail? And why are these people yeah, that's all. She also brought up the fact that so first of all, we cannot have a democracy without majority. Even though we'll have a referendum, this referendum will still come out the same. Why? Because SWAPO is the ruling party. SWAPO is the ruling party. The majority is the rule. We having a referendum, wasting our money, and saying that no other parties will win. This SWAPO party is corrupt. We further then look at the fact that we as a country are developing. We are still developing. We are not in a financial problem whereby majority of the country are poor. They can't even. They don't even have. Accepted.
Okay, so earlier you mentioned that we are already done with the ministers that are in jail. Now, I want to ask you a question. Is that not already evident to justify that the Namibian justice system is corrupt?
It's not evidence. Why? Because these people are in jail. Why do I say so? Because if these people weren't in jail, the justice system would have failed us. They would have been bought. These people, this corrupt former justice minister would have paid money in order to leave the country. And then we further move on to the second speaker from Team Proposition. She brought up the fact that there are officials that are corrupt and biased. She brought up the fact that we are a democratic country and we need a referendum that will allow the people to give their opinion. That's why after every 5 years we have an election whereby the citizens can choose their president. She also brought up the fact that the Team Proposition kept on bringing the fact that our constitution is corrupt and biased, which is totally irrelevant within this debate. We say that today's debate motion says that we will allow the public to do referendum, and as Team Opposition totally disagree with that. And I think Team Proposition don't understand today's debate. And then she further then said the former minister is involved into scams, and how are we supposed to trust how are we supposed to trust this constitution? First of all, these are old things. We're talking about the past. We don't bring the past into the future, which is totally irrelevant. She also said that people lost faith within this, with the election and all that. First of all, what you can't guarantee us giving this referendum, wasting all our money. This will bring out the same result. This will bring out more efficient results. This is totally irrelevant. Why? Because denied. This is totally irrelevant. Why? Because first of all, if you're saying the people have lost faith into the constitution and all that, what will guarantee you that this time they will vote the referendum, yes or no? Second of all, the second speaker said the EVMs, the court ruling for the EVMs said it was unconstitutionally and corrupt. First of all, that is totally as well irrelevant. Why? Because in 2014, the High Court ruled that the using EVMs without paper trail was totally allowed. And now they bring up the fact, without research, that without research that it was unconstitutionally and it was corrupt. With this, I raise my case. Thank you.
Referendum, constitution, EVMs, all those funny words. We're about to find out what the adjudicators made out of the arguments brought forward today. So we're going to give them 2 minutes to adjudicate and tell us who is the winner of this debate as well as why. Thank you, speakers, for coming through and bringing forward those very relevant arguments that will give me something to think about tonight. But until then, stay tuned.
The king's here. Can I get a hell And if you don't know, you don't ask. I'm top 5.
Goeiemorgen Namibia, goeiemorgen. Goeiemorgen Namibia. Welkom bij Klutskompas Show 24 hours. Onze is op bij Rascamp, Outer Nature, Verde Media Camp. Onze is op, onze is blij, Media.
She is Peter Shalulile with her at the meet.
Yo!
Bring it.
I never made it, but I know what it takes. I'm motivated by a mix of emotions. Can understand it fully, appreciate my standing, go out of this world and right on time. Oh, never in my life have I seen the sky light up like this. Mission control, do you read me? Silly my coordinates,
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Name Williams, and I was the second half of our adjudication panel for this evening's debate. So, for the motion, this House believes that whether or not we should have a revote should be decided by a people-only referendum. We had Team Hage Geingob as proposition and our swing team as team opposition. So the verdict that we came up with at the end of the day was that we gave the debate to team proposition. And we have three main reasons for this. We've identified three big issues that both teams tried to argue against, but we believe that the manner in which proposition argued gave them the win. Firstly, we see the issue of corruption that ran through the entire debate. Prop comes and tells you that our courts are corrupt, they're affiliated with a corrupt government, and we see that even our Minister of Justice, who's supposed to be a representation of how orderly and constitutional our courts operate, was involved in a big corruption scandal. To that, team opposition comes and tells us, well, at the end of the day, these guys, even though they were involved in this corruption scandal, they're sitting in jail, so it disproves the corruption. The reason why we didn't buy into it as much is because at the end of the day, the fact that they were involved in the corruption scandal in the first place proves and works with team's proposition analysis of why the courts are corrupt, because of the manner in which the people in power represented the nation and their issues in government. Secondly, they came and talked about the impact the referendum has on democracy. Basically, proposition came up and said it's an important part of representation of the people, and they'll come to participate. They should be able to choose their own leaders, and if they feel that the vote was illegitimate, they should be allowed to come up and say we want a revote. But then opposition came and told us, well, basically this goes against democracy because you give this false dichotomy to the people and you undermine democracy by giving them only one choice. We bought into both of the ideas, but at the end of the day, the fact that you're giving the people the ability to say basically we want to revote so we can actually choose our own leaders because we don't believe in the results. We bought more into that than the entire argument of the false dichotomy, because at the end of the day, it is still the people choosing whether or not they see the votes as illegitimate. It is still the people choosing if they want to have a new vote, and the people will end up choosing their leaders at the end of the day if they vote for a revote. And thirdly, we see the impact the referendum has on the country and the people. They basically, as team proposition, come and tell us about how at the end of the day, these people negatively affect those on the ground. They take the money away. We believe this is an investment in our future when we allow the people to put the correct people in power. Or at the end of the day, even if the results are the same, even if the leader is corrupt, we believe it's better for the people to actually have chosen it and deal with the consequences of their own choices rather than the consequences of a corrupt voting system. And then team opposition comes and tells us, well, at the end of the day, you're wasting money and resources. They come and tell us how Namibia is currently struggling economically, and taking money away from that to waste on something that would have the exact same outcome is not valid. The reason why we bought into proposition more is because they come and tell us how this is an investment in the people's future. This is an investment in the sense that if the vote comes out different, then the corrupt officials will not be in those positions of power to be able to take money away from the poor people in the first place. And basically for the reasons of corruption, for the issue of whether or not referendum is justified and who should vote for the people in power and how this affects the people and the country, we gave it to team proposition.
Thank you, Name, for that debriefing, if I can call it that. And thank you guys for watching. Until next time, it was, of course, Hage Geingob in studio, Delta Secondary School, as well as Concordia College. Thank you guys for coming through. And join us again next time, same place. Until then, debaters, you can shake hands, and you guys can share the video. So join us again next time, and of course, have yourself an awesome day.